Soccer's second webinar in our 2024 webinar series. My name is Reed Calder, and I am BC Soccer's Digital Media and Communications Coordinator. I oversee all the external and internal online engagement, communication pieces, and things like that. I am very excited about this specific webinar, as obviously playing in sports and working in sports, it hits close to home. So Dr. Aaron Binstock from Strive Health and Performance is a certified complete concussion management provider, and we are very excited to have him with us today as we cover, concussion management within the beautiful game of soccer. So I will let Aaron get into more of his background as well as the presentation, but please welcome Dr. Aaron Binstock.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, let's see if I can get this going here. All right. Yeah, first of all, appreciate you having me. Appreciate everyone who's tuning in to just taking your time to hopefully gain a little bit of information. Yeah, my name is Aaron Binstock. I'm a chiropractor and co-owner of Strive Health and Performance. We've got locations in Coquitlam as well as the Brentwood area. We're a team of chiropractors, physiotherapists, massage therapists, kinesiologists. We've got an acupuncturist as well as a naturopath. And of course, a lot of our therapists are trained specifically with complete concussion management when it comes to dealing with concussions. So today I'm very excited to chat with you guys. Unfortunately, 45 minutes is not enough to cover everything there is to know about concussions. So my goal today is really just to help everybody understand a little bit more about what a concussion actually is, and more importantly, how do we properly manage our athletes. So I'll try to make it as engaging as possible, but also informative. I can't really see the chat box, but Reed is going to be monitoring it. So I highly encourage you guys, please be vulnerable. Ask as many questions as you want. There will be a Q&A period, but at the same time, if there's something you want to ask, please, by all means, go for it. So with that, let's get right into it. I think we're here for a reason. There is a concussion problem, but I think before we actually dive into what a concussion is, I think we need to understand kind of the framework of what is leading to this concussion problem. For starters, it's very prevalent, right? So research suggests 10 to 30% of athletes will get a concussion each year, but that number is actually higher because we're not very good at detecting it and definitely not very good at documenting it. So we have research that suggests 50% of concussions are actually missed. So this is a scary thought, because if we're not detecting them properly, then we're going to lead to a lot of mismanagement of concussions, which, in my opinion, the biggest issue we have is that athletes are not being managed properly. Essentially, we're sending them back to play way too soon, which is leading to what we have here. Obviously, worst case is death and severe brain injury, but long-term damage, right? So we really want to avoid that. The last point I'm going to touch on here is we wouldn't really expect this, but healthcare practitioners as a whole, we're not very well educated on concussions, and definitely not being up to date, which is scary because I'm guessing most of us are sending our athletes to our GPs or chiropractors, physios, whoever, for that guidance of when can they go back to play. But if we're not up to date on the most recent information, then these decisions are not really evidence-based. And again, it could lead to further injury and damage. So again, the main point I'm going to drive home a lot is we're seeing a lot of mismanagement of these injuries, and I'm hoping that I can give you all some tools to avoid this problem. Okay. Now the second part of this is, our sports organizations. What tools do we have in place? The fact that BC Soccer has taken this step to, help educate its members is a really good step in the right direction. But I'm curious, I want to get anyone's opinion who's willing to, again, be vulnerable. On us, just throw in the chat box, 0 to 100. How confident do you feel in detecting if a concussion has actually happened? Let's take away the one where someone's lost consciousness and it's pretty obvious. But for any other way, 100 is, I feel super confident to diagnose or detect that I'm pretty sure this is a concussion. 0 is, I have no idea. So just quickly throw that number in there. Read, if anyone's throwing numbers in there, can you just read them out loud? Obviously, you don't need names attached to it.
So Soleil put 70%. There's a 50, 1, 50, 10, 60.
Right, so a wide range, and obviously some of us really don't feel that confident. I mean, Soleil, that's a solid answer at 70. But that's part of this issue, and I hope to bring that number up for you guys. I just want to take this one step further. Same question, but now assume you know it's concussion. How confident do you know, or do you feel in your abilities to, what is the next step? What do I now tell this athlete to do? And again, you're confident that this is the best thing to do moving forward. 0 to 100. Very vague. Just curious. Same thing, Reed. Do we have some answers rolling in?
Sorry, I was muted that whole time. 60, 60, 50, 60, 60.
Right. So again, I mean, thank you for everyone putting their numbers in there. But that just goes to show, I mean, really half the time, we're not really sure what to do next. And although detecting a concussion is very important, finding out what the next best step is really almost just as important. So thank you for that. So really what this brings me to that point again is that a lot of coaches and trainers just don't feel like they have the right tools and resources to make these decisions. And that's impactful because also a lot of you are probably volunteers, and it's not fun to have that decision weigh on you if somebody was to get injured. So taking it that one step further too, our associations, what real policies do we have in place to help everybody with detecting when a concussion happens, right? What should coaches and trainers look for? Do you guys have checklists in place? Should we send the player to the hospital? Can they go back into play, right? The last part is what's in place for return to activity, right? Do we have a process? Do you have to go to your GP? Is there anything in place? And what I'm going to show you kind of later in the presentation is the systems that Complete Concussion Management has in place addresses all of these issues. But it's just, I really wanted to highlight this to just make everyone understand that it's really important that everyone involved, A, there's a lot of communication, and B, there is some degree of education understanding as to how to recognize and what to do next. Okay, before we get into the nitty gritty of what's happened with the concussion, it is important to just tell this story. So for anyone who doesn't know, Rowan Stringer, in 2013, she was a 17-year-old female rugby player, excuse me, and she died after a tackle on the field. So the doctors did try to relieve the swelling in the brain, but unfortunately they were unsuccessful. And after digging in, they determined that the cause of death was what we call second impact syndrome. And for those who don't know, that's essentially when you get a second concussion before you've recovered from the previous one. And again, when we talk about this mismanagement, this is obviously a very classic case of mismanagement. And it did take some time. As you can see, 2019, Ontario did pass a law called Rowan's Law. They also have similar laws in the States, but essentially it is mandated across the province in youth sports to have actual concussion education for, the members of the association, as well as, excuse me, removal and return to activity protocols. So we're not quite there in BC, but this is something we really need to be need to do moving forward. Okay, the meat and potatoes here. What is actually happening in a concussion? Okay, a concussion is an acceleration-deceleration injury to the brain. And there's a little video here, just hopefully that works for you guys. But as you can see, as there's that impact, the brain kind of shifts back and forth. It's not bruised. There's no tearing or damage specifically done to the brain, but as you can see it moving back and forth there, that causes a lot of stretching or shearing within those brain tissue and the neurons. Those neurons being stretched, it leads to a lot of reactions that essentially causes a whole depletion of energy within the brain. And this is going to be something we're going to dive further into, because that's essentially the biggest issue with what's happening in a concussion. Okay. So there are two phases that happen. So the first is what we call the excitation phase. And this only really lasts seconds to a few minutes. Probably the best example to understand what that is, if you see a big collision and, an athlete falls to the ground after the collision, they go to stand up and try to walk forward, and then they just stumble and fall again. That's that excitation phase, because you have just millions of neurons firing, sending signals, and the brain is just overstimulated and confused, and you forget how to walk, essentially. But like I said, that settles pretty quickly, and then that athlete seems to be able to gather themselves and walk no problem again. But the second phase is this spreading depression, or what we call energy deficit, okay? And this is going to be the focus, all right? Unfortunately, we do have to get a little sciencey here, because this is the best way to really hopefully help everybody understand what's actually happening, as well as the process. So also stop me if I'm going too fast, or this isn't making sense, or something needs to be explained better. But this study was done on mice, and if you can see this axis here where the numbers are going upwards, this is just measuring that energy within the brain. And then as we go across, this is time from the onset of giving these mice a concussion, okay? So the sham just implies that there was a group that did not get a concussion. And then you can see as time goes on after the onset of concussion, those energy levels go down. But the good news is they start to go back up. And at some point, they normalize. So with mice, it's 120 hours, which is roughly 5 days. Okay. What is really important to understand about this specifically is your vulnerability period is this entire phase here where your energy levels are still depleted. What that means is you're more vulnerable to get a second concussion, i.e. it will take less force to get that second hit, okay? And we're gonna look in a few slides as to what that impact can have. So this was also done on mice, all right? Same thing, they're measuring energy levels. And then these are some different scenarios, which I'll explain. But this whole slide is really looking at what is the impact of getting a second concussion before you fully recovered. So controls, again, they did not get a concussion. Mild TBI, that means concussion. And 5 days, this meant they gave a group of mice a concussion, and then 5 days later, they gave them another concussion. Remember from the previous slide, they've recovered after 5 days. This other group here is 3 days after the first concussion. They gave a second concussion. So remember, they have not fully recovered at that point. And the last group is severe TBI, or traumatic brain injury, which is no longer a concussion. It's a severe brain injury that involves brain damage. So what do we take away from this? Two things. So if we look at this 5-day interval group, yes, there is significantly less energy levels in the brain compared to no concussion. However, if you compare it to the mice that only got one concussion, there's no difference, okay? So that's illustrating the point that as long as we recover properly from the first concussion, there's no real additive effect or compounding effect to get that second concussion later on, okay? But let's move on to this 3-day interval, okay? This is now someone's getting a second concussion before they've fully recovered. And as you can see, it's essentially just as bad as getting a severe traumatic brain injury. And this 10% mortality is just saying that in this study, 10% of the mice in each group died. Okay, so again, we got to really, really hammer home recovery, and I'll say proper recovery is extremely, extremely important for us to determine before they go back to play. No questions yet? We're good? I assume you muted too.
You're good.
Okay.
You're good.
There's only really one more sciencey slide here, okay? But we just looked at some stuff in mouse, and it's like, okay, we're not mice, so what does it look like in humans? So this was a study done on humans. Same thing, we're measuring energy levels within your brain, and then this is 3, 15, 22, 30 days after receiving a concussion, okay? So the 1 star here, again, this is implying that we still have a significant drop in energy levels, i.e. we're not recovered yet. But as we get into this 22-day group, you see there's more stars, and the 30-day group, this is telling us that sometime between the 22 and 30-day mark, our energy levels in the brain have restored back to normal. So basically think to yourself, concussions, you're going to recover between 22 and 30 days. Of course, some people do recover sooner, some take longer, but for the most part, we know that sweet spot is the 22 to 30 days. This red line, what does this mean? Typically, you will resolve your symptoms, so your headaches, your nausea, dizziness, those typically go away after 7 to 10 days. But what we just saw here is that your brain is not fully recovered until 22 to 30 days. So the take-home message on this too, symptoms do not equal recovery, which I hear all the time that a lot of people say, oh, I feel fine, so I'm good to go back. But they're not. And we will, again, illustrate this even more in the next slide. Okay, this is literally the last research slide. But this is just giving you 6 real-life examples of individuals. They are all males. It tells you the age, the sport. That doesn't really matter. But what you can see, these are the symptoms they got after their first concussion. Here's how long they had symptoms for. So pretty short, right? 3, 4, 8, 7, 8, 5. But all of these 6 individuals, they got a second concussion, and here's how long it took after their first concussion to get it. So you can see nobody is past that 21-day mark. Some are sooner. And now, here's what they felt symptom-wise after the second concussion, which all of them have more symptoms. This is showing you how long did it take for these symptoms to go away. And just look at how much that number skyrockets, okay? Something to consider too is those who had concussions within a shorter time period, 9 days, 10 days, look how long it took, 52 days, 59. As opposed to this one who took 21 days, they only had symptoms for 24 days after, okay? The last part here, this is your energy levels. So again, in humans, we're thinking 22 to 30 days, but now after a second concussion, this one took 120 days, 90, 60. So we're just trying to understand that if you do fall into that second impact syndrome, those recoveries are going to take even longer, and those do compound, as you can see in these examples. All right, so we're just going to go over a few scenarios, okay? Let's say Reed gets a concussion. He comes into clinic within 24, 48 hours. We diagnose him. We put him through the protocol. Again, it takes roughly 2 to 4 weeks. He fully recovers. Brain energy levels are normal. He's good to go. But let's take it to scenario B. Reed, same thing. He gets his concussion. He comes in. He feels great after 7, 10 days. He's got a big game on the weekend. I feel fine, he says to himself, so he goes and plays. and he gets a second hit or a concussion. And now, instead of a recovery taking 2 to 4 weeks and only energy levels kind of like you see at that 80%, they're dropping lower. And again, just like that previous slide, now he's looking at like a 3 to 4 month recovery instead of the 2 to 4 weeks. Let me take it one step further. I mean, hey, he's been having symptoms for 1-2 months. That's a long time to be off soccer and feeling symptoms. He's finally feeling better. And even though the doctor hasn't cleared him yet, he's got his cup final. Is that what you guys call it? I think cup final, league cup final. And so he wants to play. So he goes and he plays and he gets another concussion. So now his energy levels are just dropping like crazy. And who knows what this recovery looks like. I'm sure he's done for the season. Does he ever play soccer again? Does he have symptoms that last forever? Who knows, right? You obviously don't want to play with fire. But to draw your attention to this little red line here going across, if you get below a certain threshold in terms of your energy levels within the brain cells, you'll actually get cell death, and that's permanent damage, okay? So again, I just need to highlight the fact that we cannot be sending athletes back into play unless we know their brain has fully recovered in terms of those energy levels. The last scenario is, again, let's go back to the first one. Reed was super good at following instructions. He took his 2 to 4 weeks. He went through all the protocol testing. He's recovered. 3 months later, he gets a second concussion. Okay, he comes in, he goes through the same protocol, clears everything, he goes back to play. Notice that in this scenario, those brain energy levels don't drop even further, and his recovery, it doesn't get longer. Why? I don't know. Let's throw it out in the chat. Anyone, why do you think his recovery stayed the same? And read if there's anyone chatting something up there. Can you tell me? Or you can say nobody's saying anything.
Sounds good. Nothing yet. I'll give it just a minute.
All right. There's no wrong answer. Well, there are some wrong answers, but don't worry about it. It's okay. Still nothing?
Still nothing.
Okay, that's okay. The reason is because he properly or fully recovered from the original concussion before he got that next one. So yes, we do not want to just get multiple concussions, but the research shows right now that there's not that compounding effect. Okay, so as long as you recover fully, it's okay to get another concussion. Again, any questions, let me know. Okay, so we've talked about, we know generally how long it can take, but it wasn't a very finite, hey, everyone's recovered in 21 days. So how do we actually know, like, when can I send my athlete back to play? So again, I'm going to throw it out to the chat. Just a simple yes or no. Can we use an MRI to determine if we've recovered from a concussion? Just simple yes or no. 50-50 shot.
So we have one no, one yes, a bunch of no's.
All right. The answer is no, because there is no brain damage, so the MRI is not going to show anything. How about a CT scan? Same thing, yes or no?
A no, a yes, no. Pretty split, that one.
Okay. That's a tough one. It's tricky, but again, the answer is no, because there is not any brain damage, so there's nothing for the CT to show us. Okay. Of course, if someone had a moderate or severe traumatic brain injury, then yes, stuff is going to show up, but we're just going to focus on concussions specifically. And I'm not going to make you chat yes or no, because I'm hoping that the message has got across that we also cannot rely on symptoms. So if we can't rely on any of those things, what are we relying on? Baseline testing, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this at all, but this is something that gives us objective data as to whether someone has recovered or not. It is definitely not a standalone. Everybody's going to be different. So it is a whole clinical picture, I will say. But doing baseline testing essentially is a battery of tests that we do ideally before the season starts, which tells us how this person can perform and how the brain performs when they're healthy. And then if they do get a concussion, the last phase of us clearing them is we retest the baseline, and we need to make sure that they can score just as good or better than when they did it originally before the injury. And if they do not perform, then that tells us that whatever area of the brain is still not functioning back to 100%. So baseline testing right now is the best we have, okay? It's not used for a diagnosis, in case anybody's wondering. It can be helpful sometimes, but it's not really for that. Okay, it's mostly just used for us to help us decide if someone is safe to return to sport. And one thing I do want to point out is that, baseline testing is not standardized, but single tests are not enough. I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard of the SCAT. They've got up to SCAT 6 now. And I don't know if any of you have heard of the impact test. Well, while those are helpful in terms of information they give, alone, they are not enough. Oh, okay. Now, some of you guys might be coaches, but again, I want to throw out in the chat just anything. If you're at a game or a practice and you suspect there might be an injury, just throw out like what's one thing you might do or one thing you want to think about in order to determine, should I remove this player or can I let them play? Soleil, I feel like you must have an answer. Sorry, I have to call you out.
I always err on the side of caution.
Right. Okay, and now you're on mic. So specifically, what might you do? Like what would just be like any first step?
For me, I assess the situation and try to determine what happened, if I could see how hard the hit was, and then also follow up with them by talking and asking some of these questions I'm seeing in the chat, like, are they nauseous? Are they confused? Are their pupils dilating? Things like that.
Those are all awesome. Great job, guys. I like what you touched on. Assess MOI, as mechanism of injury. What happened, right? Does it look like it could have even been a concussion? Because not every impact is going to cause a concussion. Also, something I don't really touch on here, but we will now, is it doesn't always have to be a hit to the head. You definitely do not have to have a loss of consciousness. And then you guys are saying a lot of great things. Ask questions, right? Do they have symptoms? So specifically, if they have symptoms and there was some mechanism of injury, they're removed from the game. Like you say, when in doubt, sit them out. But absolutely, if they have symptoms, you're taking them out. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. But some other questions to ask as well, which can go into the confusion that somebody wrote, is asking some orientation questions like, where are you? Who are we playing? What half is it? Who scored the last goal? You're really just trying to get a sense of, yes, are they with it? And can they answer those questions pretty well? If they're really humming and hawing, I mean, it's one of those things that you'll know if they are on the ball or not. But if they can't answer those questions clearly, then I would remove them from play. If there are no symptoms, they're rattling off these answers, no problem, then let them go play, okay? But of course, like I said, when in doubt, sit them out, okay? One thing, if you are removing them, typically, I mean, in Vancouver, we don't have a lot of sun right now, but if it is hotter, you want to sit them in the shade and monitor them for 2 to 3 hours or so. And don't let them sleep right then. The reason is the cooling off is we want to lower their body temperature. That will help with the recovery process. But the monitoring is more, we want to make sure that their like cognitive state, or they're basically they're not fading from a conscious level. If they are, then you should be taking them to the hospital. I do make a point here that traditionally we've thought wake them up every 2 hours at night. That is not the case anymore. You want to actually let them sleep. So again, assuming post-injury to before bedtime, they're not like decreasing consciousness level, then don't wake them up. Let them sleep at nighttime. And then the last part I put here is refer, I say to us, but refer to some therapist that you know has specific training in concussion management. And proper management is the key, as we've talked about, but the sooner the better. And I'll point this out later, but I'll say it now. The research also shows that the quicker you actually act on management, the decreased chance you have of prolonged recovery. Okay. This is just, I mean, you can screenshot this if you want, but I just touched on a few red flags, which means if you see any of this stuff, then these are signs you should take the person to the hospital, because it might be more than just a concussion. Vomiting is probably the most common one you'll see. And it doesn't mean that because they're vomiting, something terrible is happening, but again, you want to err on the side of caution. If these things are happening, that's when the hospital will take a CT scan, because they want to rule out a bleed in the brain, basically. All right. So let's back to the chat here. It's a very quick yes or no, and I'll just eliminate the thought of rest. But outside of rest, who here feels like you can actually treat a concussion? Yeah, again, yes or no is okay.
No, just takes time. Yes. No.
It's okay. This is why we're having this. This is good. And trust me, it's a very, like, that's
Process.
the majority of people don't believe that there is much you can do other than like time and rest. But that is not accurate. And again, a lot of all this research now is like active rehab is in. So I wrote here, rest is out. Again, we used to believe that rest, dark room, just remove yourself from all stimulation. But now we actually know that if you do that, that is actually going to prolong your recovery. I won't quite get into why. That's for another discussion if someone wants to talk about, but rest is out. So I will show the protocol of like recovery in a slide or two, but we still say like relative rest, because you still don't want to go out there and just like do everything, because you still don't want to trigger symptoms like crazy, but it's just relative rest. If you have symptoms, that's okay. You can still do things around the house or watch TV, whatever, as long as those symptoms aren't getting escalated from whatever it is you're doing. Okay. But let's talk about the actual treatment. So we actually want to do active rehab within 7 to 10 days of the injury. And this one specifically, which I think is the next point, exercise therapy. So I'll start with that one. So with a concussion, there's actual like blood flow disruptions essentially to the brain. So we want to reestablish and regulate that blood flow to the brain. Again, we're starting this within 7 to 10 days. So we need people to start exercising. I'll get into specifically what that looks like, but I will just preface this by saying it's not just go exercise at whatever intensity you want. It does need to be controlled and guided, but I'll get into that. But one of the other things in terms of treatment is manual therapy. So essentially the amount of force it takes to get a concussion is greater than the force to get a whiplash. So essentially, anytime you get a concussion, you're going to have some whiplash effect, meaning treatment on the neck. As chiropractors, we can adjust and will adjust, but usually not for the first couple of weeks. But there's a lot of soft tissue or call it massage type stuff that we do within the neck that a huge contributor to headaches. So that will relieve the headaches. Another thing we do is we provide a lot of nutritional information. Okay, when you have a concussion, there's a lot of inflammation going on. So we want to reduce that inflammation, which will help recovery. Another thing, I should also say, sorry, that not every treatment is going to look the same. It really depends on your symptoms and where you're at, but it will be a combination of these ones. So people who have visual issues, like a lot of times people have trouble, like if they're watching TV and a sport, if it's sports too, like something fast going by, that gives them like nausea, blurriness in the eyes, visual, like trying to do homework, right? So there's a lot of vestibular, which is more balanced stuff, and visual issues. That's probably the second most common thing after just like having to treat the neck is reestablishing what's happening in your visual system. And that sounds scary, but it's just, again, it's all temporary. We just need to give you exercises to kind of recalibrate. Let's just put it that way. But the bottom line is there is actually a lot of treatment that can get done and should get done. And I will say, of course, there are some people who they don't do anything and they recover and they don't have a prolonged recovery. That's obviously possible too. So 30% of patients, based on the research, do develop persistent symptoms, which is, everyone has a different definition of what persistent is, but we're for sure beyond 21 to 30 days. And it's very preventable. I mean, I'm not going to say 100% preventable, but again, if you establish that treatment and intervention early on, it's pretty rare that you're going to go into this prolonged recovery. And this is something that I touched on, right? Like the best chance for a speedy recovery is early assessment, diagnosis, treatment, and education is huge. I'm just giving a very quick, what would you call it, testimonial here, because we take a symptom score on everybody when they come in for an assessment, and the amount of times that their symptom scores significantly drop, like a day after the first visit, is huge. And it's not from me necessarily digging in and releasing all the tension. It's the education piece of essentially, you're going to be okay. This is normal what you're feeling, and it's going to go away. So much of what we feel symptom-wise too is like the fear, stress, and anxiety. I don't know how well you can read this. Oh, maybe I can, there you go. Okay, so if we do get a concussion, people come in. What are your athletes? What do they kind of have to go through? And this isn't just for athletes, by the way. So I've again, you can screenshot this if you'd like, but this is basically what happens, right? The first stage everybody's in is what we call symptom-limited activity, and you'll notice it's really just the first 24 to 48 hours, and then it is split into two columns here. One is physical, so obviously this involves going back to sport and activity, and the other is cognitive, which is either going to school or for those of us who work. And the reason they're in two different columns is each person can go through them at a different pace / rate, just depends on their symptoms. But I'm going to just mostly stick on the right side here because we're here for soccer and the athletes, so most coaches want to know what they have to go through. So like I said, the first step is after that first appointment, that next week, we're booking them in for what we call a treadmill test. This is just a fast walking test that we put a heart rate monitor on the athlete and we slowly increase the incline, which gradually gets their heart rate up. And really, we just need to see at what heart rate can the athlete or the brain tolerate the exercise, okay? And there's a certain amount we go to. If they can pass this, then they get cleared for a light non-contact sport activity, right? So essentially, we want them to go to practice. They're not really doing team drills, but it's just sports specific, low intensity. How does the body react to that? If the body develops symptoms from that, well, we take a bit of a step back and we'll try again. But if they can do that without symptom increase, then they get cleared for a more intense practice. Again, The drills will never involve contact because, of course, we want to avoid that second impact syndrome. But this is a phase where we want them to really practice at a high intensity, essentially game level, and doing every type of skill that is involved. And we have to see how their body responds to that. If they can do that symptom-free, and they're at school, full days of school, symptom-free, then we bring them back for one final clearance test. And if they have a baseline, we'll retest their baseline. And then if they clear that, then they go back. Well, we tell them, we always suggest do a full practice before you play a game, but depending on the timing of the game, some athletes just go straight into the game. But that's the protocol that we do. Of course, sometimes you have to move up or down depending on how your body responds. But it is very much a gradual process, step by step. And I will say, because we go back to the whole not using symptoms as a reliance to tell us that we're fully recovered, because I hear all the time about people who say that they are symptom free, and then as soon as they start to exercise, boom, symptoms come on. So again, it tells us that they're not symptom free. But even to the point where they've gone all the way past this stage of an intense practice, or at least their version of what they say they did, and they say they're symptom free, and we bring them in to do this final physical exertion test, they can fail that too, and they cannot hide how they're feeling. So that's the other thing, is athletes are going to lie sometimes because they want to play and they're competitive. But if you put them through some of these actual exertion tests, they can't hide their symptoms, which is great for us and great for them, but they probably don't think it's great because they don't get to play. Okay, I'm just going to do a couple success stories here just to give you guys a little bit of context, but of course I chose a couple soccer players. One was more recent, 21-year-old female soccer player. She came to me 36 days after the injury happened. She had been seeing a chiropractor, but he referred her to me. One thing that I did note here is she didn't actually have symptoms after the hit or the injury until 2 days later. And I use this one because, again, symptoms don't always come on right away. So we still need to tread lightly and proceed with caution. Just for her specifically, though, really the biggest issues were screen time in class caused headaches and dizziness. And then she was cleared to play for games 24 days after I saw her. So yes, a 50-day recovery, which is greater than that 22 to 30. But again, this is to try to illustrate the example of trying to get in and have the proper treatment right away or as soon as possible. And then the second one is just a 15-year-old female soccer player. She came to me 6 days after her injury. She got hit in the head with a soccer ball quite hard. And again, the main thing was she didn't see it coming. I put this as something to stand out. This was her symptom score was 76 out of 132. And that's generally pretty high, or it's higher than normal, put it that way, than most concussions that do come in. She did fail her treadmill test the first time we tried it, but a week later she passed it, and then we cleared her 36 days post-injury. And the reason I put this one in is just to kind of illustrate the fact that even though she failed that treadmill test, she then was put on a graduated physical exercise program. Because if you fail, yeah, you don't get to practice, but you still have to exercise for 30 minutes a day. It's just at a targeted heart rate. I forgot to mention that earlier, sorry. But her body was able to adapt. And that's really the biggest thing with concussion recovery, is slowly exposing your body to the stimuli so that it can adapt and eventually handle and tolerate more, of course, until you're recovered. But I did want to turn it over to Reed to share a little something that he wanted to share as well.
Thanks, Aaron. Great presentation. So I just wanted to share back in 2019 and why this hit so close to home. Back in 2019, I was about 25 at the time. I've had a history of concussions from various sports and things like that, but this was the most recent and the worst one. I was playing goalkeeper at the time on turf, and I came sliding out and got a knee to the temple. The impact initially was not as bad as some of the other ones I had where I literally couldn't get up, and you could obviously tell there were symptoms. I went on to continue playing and didn't have any symptoms for up to about 2-ish weeks. Following those 2 weeks, I actually went to the movie theaters and I was complaining to the person I was with that, the sound, the lights was really bothering me. And then all of a sudden, next thing I know, I'm waking up in my parents' house on the floor because I actually passed out in the movie theater because all of the lights and sound brought on the symptoms extreme. And then obviously, I went to the hospital, and after that, and as Aaron touched on, I actually did a lot of these protocols with specialists back in 2019. It was about a 6-month road to recovery, and that included 3 months entirely off work, and then 3 months with modified work. So obviously, going on walks every hour, limiting the screen time. So kind of just to alliterate that the timeline to certain situations like this are always different. But yeah, so that's why this kind of hits close to home. So thanks for letting me share my story there, Aaron.
Of course, yeah. And I will say, just based off of our experience and our data, that again, for anyone coming in within that first 48 hours, I mean, I would say like 9 out of 10, like they're recovered within that and cleared within that 2 to 4 week period. Okay. I know we're getting close to the end here on time, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this, but I did want to illustrate what is out there, and obviously we use this system here, just to give as a reference if anybody wants to learn or kind of reach out, and I can tell you more about it. But Complete Concussion Management, I mean, they are a network of over 450 clinics, which is great if you guys are ever traveling and you need some management, or you have an athlete that is almost cleared and they want to travel with you and you can go to get clearance at a different clinic. They will have the access to the same information. But I'll just go into some of the perks here. So they do provide a sideline course. It's just a 1 hour, it's free. If anybody's interested, Reed, you can let me know and I can get them like a free code. But it's just a general overview, probably some of what we already touched on, but it also teaches you how to use the technology that they have, which is an app, which I will briefly touch on right now. But it essentially tells you step by step on the field how to decide if someone has a concussion or not, and then those next steps. So it's a really good, again, resource. Also on their website, they have a ton of resources, which you can see on the right. So you can feel free to browse all of that for free. But they have this concussion tracker app. So you as a coach, a manager, you can create your own team. I will say that your athletes do have to be registered, whether it's through a baseline or they have to have, had an injury of some sort in order to add them to your team. But once they've been added to your team, like the Alaska Giants here, you can have a list of all of your players. Why is this important as a coach? Well, as you can see, there's different colors surrounding each person's head or picture. And this basically tells you what status they're at in their concussion recovery. I mean, green is they don't have one or they're cleared to return. But red or yellow, that means that they have something going on. And then you as the coach can click on that person. And then on this screen here, it tells you specifically where they're at in their recovery and it view stage permissions. I'm not sure if you can read that, but again, it tells you if they can practice, it tells you specifically what drills can they do, can they not do. Again, this goes back to that communication piece because yes, sometimes athletes are truthful, but you might have Reed that, again, he's hungry to get back to full practice, be with his teammates, and he'll tell you, the coach, that he's good to go, or I just came from Doc Aaron and he cleared me. But you can pull up the app and just make sure and verify, because you don't want this athlete to be, put them in harm's way. And you also don't want to be liable for letting them go back to play when they shouldn't have. Okay. The other thing it allows you to do is report an injury. So I did touch on the fact that if something happens, you can take your phone out, click on that player's name. It will literally report an injury, and it takes you, like I said, step by step how to report the injury. And then based off of the answers you've put in, again, it tells you you should remove that player or let them play. And as soon as you submit a report, everyone involved on that profile, if it's their GP, if they happen to be at our clinic, we all get notified that you just submitted an injury report. And then we would contact the family to say, hey, sounds like Reed's got an injury. Let's get him in for an assessment, and we can obviously get him recovered. Okay. So everyone is being involved. This is just kind of what it looks like for doing some of the sideline testing. But again, it's very much step by step. You don't need to memorize anything. And the results are immediate. And if they do have a baseline test, once you complete it, complete the on-field assessment, it will tell you if they basically passed compared to before their injury in that moment, or again, if they failed, and hey, you should take them out. I mean, this is kind of the same stuff. So I think we're pretty, oh yeah. The last thing I want to touch on is just that as an athlete, if you do come in with a concussion, you have a ton of information at your disposal. So like I said, there's a whole diet plan. It talks about all the foods you should eat, stuff you should stay away from, meal plans. In here, there's just a recovery package of all kinds of information. There's a section here where you can talk to your provider, healthcare provider, and let them know any updates that are important. And then up in this top right here, this is always specific to you, where you're at in your recovery. And when you click on it, again, here's the things that are okay to do. Here are things that are not okay to do for now. So it's just always that reassurance that we're going in the right direction and we're not doing anything to compromise our recovery. So that pretty much wraps it up. I know it's a lot of information. I hope I wasn't boring, but some take-home points, if there's anything to take away from this, is there's no damage in your brain, okay? It's just a temporary injury as long as we manage it properly. Do not rely on symptoms for return to play decision. There are lots of ways we can treat, and we want to do that as soon as possible because that will lead to proper management, okay? Thank you for your time and hanging in there with me. Again, I don't know if I'll open it up to questions here, if there are any. Also, sorry, I'll just quickly say, if there's any questions that anybody has that is a little nervous to say right now, or you reflect on it, you can reach out to Reed or me, and I can certainly chat with you at a later time about it.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for that, Aaron. We'll just leave, Soleil just wrote in the chat, if anybody does have a question, feel free to write it in there. But then again, if not, Aaron and I are definitely accessible after this conversation. And just so everybody is aware, this will also be posted on our YouTube channel. So if people are unable to make it, we'll be able to share it that way as well.
Cool.
So nothing coming in yet, Aaron. So we will leave it at that. But again, anything that comes up after, if anyone thought of a question, we can provide the contact information for Aaron. But thank you very much, Aaron. This was very informative, and this is an area that continues to teach me new things, new processes, and it's a never-ending learning process. And I like to think that Canada is one of the few countries that is kind of leading the way in this area. So thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Perfect. Well, with that said, we'll let everybody go. Thank you for joining our second webinar. Just so everybody does know, we will have our third webinar at the end of March, so look out for further additional information on that as well. But thank you very much, and I hope everybody has a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Cheers.